conventional vacations, and we put our money in a conventional bank, and we put our money in a conventional retirement plan, etc., etc., etc. Do you get the point? But here's the thing. We really can't help it, can we? You see, we are submerged in living a conventional lifestyle produced by a conventional world. The problem is, and hear me, don't miss this, a conventional life is the enemy of an intentional life. Did you hear me, church? A conventional life is the direct enemy of an intentional life. In the world we live in today, actually in the world that's always been, a conventional life is the enemy of an intentional life. And my friends, this represents the major back and forth, the major struggle we feel in our lives today. And here's why. Here's why. God did not create us to live a conventional life. God created us to live an intentional life. Do you see the struggle and the strain? That's why way down deep inside of us, when we see George Bailey walk out of Potter's office, that intentional part of us says, "That-a-boy, George. Way to go, George. Way to tell him." You see, instinctively, we understand this. But practically speaking, it's very, 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 very hard to live out. In fact, I submit to you today that there is only one way to live out an intentional life. Here it is. The only way to live an intentional life is to have convictions we're willing to die for. The only way to live an intentional life is to have convictions that we're willing to die for. George Bailey had convictions that were more important to him than making money. I submit to us this morning as believers, if we are going to live an intentional life, we must have convictions that we are willing to die for. Now, this word convictions, it's become a little bit almost like the word commitment in our society today. People don't like the word, but let me just say this. Convictions is a very, very good word. What are convictions? Convictions are the unshakable essentials in our life. They are the irreducibles in our life. Convictions aren't here today and gone tomorrow. Convictions are beliefs that will never change no matter what. Convictions are stronger than our core values because true convictions are those things that we are willing to stake our very lives on, things that we're willing to die for. And the reason that convictions are so important, don't miss this, the reason that convictions are so important is that they bring intentionality to our lives. Without convictions, there are no guidelines in life. Could it be that that might be part of the problem in the world today? Let me paint you a picture of this. Think of it this way. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have driven over a steep mountain pass on the highway? Raise your hands. Now, how many of you have driven over a steep mountain pass in the middle of the night on a highway? It's a little bit scarier in the middle of the night, isn't it? Okay, here, think about that, and here's what convictions are. Convictions are like the guardrails around the road that keep us from plowing off the side of the mountain and ending up in a pile of rubble at the bottom. Convictions are the white lines painted at the sides of the road that keep us on course. Convictions are those little orange or red lights, that illuminate the guardrails and the lines on the road that keep us focused and driving safely and staying on course. My friends, convictions are so important to our lives. In fact, I would say to you this morning, they are vital to our lives. And here's why. God did not create us to live a conventional life. God created us to live an intentional life. But the only way to live an intentional life is to have convictions, beliefs that will never change, unshakable essentials, irreducibles in our life that we are willing to die for. Amen. Now you might say, well, Harv, that sounds good, but where is that in the Bible? Well, I'm glad that you asked. Because today we're going to look at the story of Daniel, awesome story, and we're going to see how the convictions he had helped him and caused him to live a very intentional life. The story of Daniel takes place during the rise of the Babylonian Empire around 600 BC. A king called Nebuchadnezzar, he raids or seizes Judah. That's where Daniel was living. And he and some of his friends are taken captive. And they're brought to this place called Babylon. And when they arrive there, they are handpicked by the palace staff to be trained for positions of leadership. So, here are Daniel and his 3 friends in a foreign land, a land where they are captives, and they are being forced to serve this king named Nebuchadnezzar, a king who has seized and pillaged their country, destroying their homes and families and communities, by and large, just ruining their lives. And as they begin their training and indoctrination in the Babylonian way of life and the Babylonian language, the king orders that Daniel and his 3 friends and all of the trainees, he orders them that they have to eat his food and drink his wine. Sounds pretty good to me. Just kidding. But there's a problem here, because Daniel and his 3 friends are good Jewish boys. And they follow the laws of Judaism. And these laws strictly prohibit them from eating the king's type of food and drinking his wine. To do so would have been very serious. It would have caused them to break the vows that they made with God. Okay, now church, think about this scenario. Daniel and his 3 friends are in a strange land, surrounded by strangers, strange customs. They're serving a pagan king who doesn't care at all about what they believe, and they very easily could have given in and said, well, let's think about this. The conventional thing to do would be for us just to go ahead and eat the king's food and drink the king's wine. Because after all, we don't want to offend him. We don't want to make the king mad. We don't want to be impolite. So let's just go ahead and do the conventional thing. Let's go ahead and do what everybody else is doing. That's what most people would have done, right? But not Daniel and his friends. They had these things called convictions. Convictions that they were willing to die for. In Daniel 1:8 it says, but Daniel determined, he was very strong about it, he determined that he would not defile, that's pretty serious, himself by eating the king's food or drinking his wine. This was the first test that Daniel and his friends had to pass in living an intentional life. And again, it would have been so easy for them just to give in, eat the king's food, drink the king's wine. I'm sure that they were tempted to. But because of their convictions, they chose to live intentionally. And it paid off, didn't it? Because they won the king's favor. After 3 years of training, when they went in before the king was more pleased with Daniel and his 3 friends than all of the other trainees. Now, if living intentionally and having convictions were this easy, more of us would have convictions and live intentional lives, right? But Daniel and his 3 friends' story isn't over yet. In fact, it's not over by a long shot. Listen to what happens next. For a while, everything goes well for them. Daniel interprets